Hello everyone, welcome to another video for this database course video series. In today's video we are going to learn about the web-based database manipulation. I'm already in the lab, you can see here in the blog, web-based database manipulation. In this video we are going to connect our database, connect MySQL, our MySQL using the PHP. We are going to retrieve and display data using the MySQL and PHP, and also we input the data directly to our database using the HTML4. Now there is also a link of you can click on this link that it will show you the slides for today's lab. I also already opened up the PHP in W3 School. Today we are going to work on this section of the MySQL database, and then MySQL databases, and what is MySQL, and so on. And also this is the database. This is my MySQL command line. I'm going to use the TMF2034DB, and then I'll say show tables. These are the tables that we have in the previous videos, and then we say select all from students. You can see these are the students. So we want to display this data, these records, number 6 records, all records, in our web application, in our browser when we open localhost. And then how can we do it? In the slides, as you can see here, these are the objective. We connect to our database via PHP, and then like the include, display, and then like the PHP form, we insert records to our database using the HTML form. And then as you can see here, there are 3 different ways to connect to the MySQL, and then to our database using the object-oriented, procedural, and PDO. I will just go through all, and then after that we have closing. I will just show you the slides. After the slides we will go through it, and then this is starting the XAMPP. Okay, here we are starting the XAMPP server. Open up the XAMPP, and then how can we connect, write the connection in the include, and so on, the order form. What I will do, I'm gonna use the object-oriented way for today's lab, and then I will just show you a different way, the easier way to connect. We will achieve the same thing here, but I'm gonna use a different way, which is the easier way. And then now let's go to the MySQL, and then the connection. You can see here there are 3 different ways. It's the MySQL object-oriented, MySQL procedural, and the PDO. First thing first, you have to go to the XAMPP server, the location that you installed your XAMPP server in the htdocs, and then we are going to, it is always in the C XAMPP and then htdocs, and in this folder we are going to create another folder. For example, let's say lab 7, or for example database lab. I will just I'm already in the folder. I already created a TMF2034-DB. You can say TMF2034-DB. This is my folder. Once you're in this folder, you just click on the new text, index.php. You need to create 2 files, index.php, and then another file, config.php. These are the 2 files that we are going to use today. One thing that you realized, my location is www and WAMP, because I am currently using the WAMP server, not the XAMPP server, but it is the same thing. Instead of for me it is the same thing. For me it's just, instead of XAMPP, I'm going to WAMP and www. Just create a folder in this location, and then create these 2 files, index.php and config.php. These are the 2 files that we will work today. And then I already open up, you can see here, this is my Sublime text. I will be using the Sublime today for the text editor. I will open up the index.php, and config.php. Currently when you go to the index.php, it is empty. I will just write the PHP. You can see here, this is the PHP, and then you can just echo hello from PHP. You can see here, and then when we go to our localhost, we go to localhost, name of the folder tmf2034-db, and then you can see here we already have our hello from PHP. Now what we need to do, you can see here the different ways to access to the MySQL is, one is like via object oriented, another one is via the procedural, and then the PDO. 3 different ways. We will work on the object oriented way, but I will show you also the other ways how can you access to your database. First thing, I will just like create an HTML here, and then I'm just gonna create a tmf2034 lab 7, and this is the HTML. I already have, this is a PHP file actually, and then I'm just gonna write some HTML to it. You can see here these are the HTML. HTML is hypertext markup language. That this is the syntax. How can we write? Every time you have to open up the HTML tag, this is the document type HTML, and this is the HTML opening tag, and then after that we have a head section and then the body section. In the head section we have title, which is the title of the page, and in the body I just simply write an h3, and then I'm just gonna say, let's say, what do we have? Display students. Let's say display students. Now when I go back to our page, you can see here we have display students. Here in HTML you can write HR, for example, a horizontal line. Then what will happen? We have a horizontal line. So you can just go ahead in W3 School in the section HTML, and then like check what are the syntax and how can you use the HTML. But for today I'm just gonna use these basics, and then there is nothing like much that we are going to do with the HTML, just like not too advanced, just simple basic HTML. Now since we already have our HTML, and then in this config.php, what we are going to do in the config.php. So first thing, I will open up our PHP tag. This is the PHP tag, and then in here we are going to connect to our database, the database that we have, which is tmf2034db, and then we are going to display the students in our web page. Now the first thing, the object oriented way, what do you need to do? First thing, we need to have a server name, we need to have our username and then the password, and then we are going to write the connection to establish the connection to our server. I will just copy paste everything, and then anyways we are going to update it and change it. First thing first, here we are creating variables. The first variable is we have a server name, we have a username, we have a password. How can you create a variable in PHP? You just put the $, and then the name of the variable, and then the local host. This local host is the host that we are going to access. So we are going to access to the WAM server or XAMPP server, which is our local host. And then the username is the username that you already have. For example, now by default it is root. And if you have password, for example in your localhost, if you already set the password, then here you write your password. If you do not have any password, you just leave it empty. Then I will just create another variable, which is db, it stands for database. And then in this db, what I will do, I will just, the database that we have, I will copy the name of the database, and then I will choose it. Why I'm using the db? db is used here automatically every time when you want to connect to the MySQL. You need to have your web server. You are telling to the MySQL and PHP that which server you are going to access. We say localhost, and then what is our username, and then what is the password. I will just also insert my password to this. I will insert my password. This is my password, and then the db which is the which database that you are going to use. I'm going to use this database, which is TMF2034. After that, we have create the connection. In this create connection, as you can see here, we have another variable which is con. This connection variable, it is a new MySQLi. This MySQLi automatically accepts 4 variables. You can add also your database directly in here, db. What will happen? This MySQLi automatically access to the server. What is the server name? The server name is localhost, and then it will ask for the username. What is the username? Which is the root, and then the password of the root, the password of your user. And then when you write your database db here, it means you are going to select and use this database. Now if you want to know more about the MySQLi, you can go ahead and search about the new MySQLi, for example MySQLi PHP, and then okay, let's go to W3 School. You can see here allows you to access to the database server, the database that you have, the MySQL servers. And then these are the, for example, the functions that you can grab. But you can see here MySQLi connect. What will happen? We have a localhost, my user, passwords, and database. This will all automatically, as I explained, what will happen? It will, okay, I will go back here. It will select the server name, the localhost, the root, the password, and db. And then here, the connection will be stored in this connection. And then after that, we are going to check the connection. This check connection, what will happen? Automatically will check, okay, this is the connection. What is this connection? This connection is equals to the connection that we established to MySQL. And then, like we are saying, if connect error, this is another function in MySQL, and PHP is another PHP function, that if you have an error in your MySQL, for example, if the username is different, is wrong, or the password, or there is something with your like for example setup, automatically it will tell you what is the problem. And then if you already successfully connect, it will tell you that okay, we already connected successfully. Now we have this file config.php, but we are in this index.php. So what we need to do, we need to include this file config.php to our index.php. This is what will happen when you include this one. Automatically when you open this page, this index.php, the first thing this include config.php will be loaded. This whole page, whole codes will be loaded at first, and after that it will execute the HTML. Now when we go back to our page, you can see here when I refresh, you can see here connected successfully. It means we successfully connected to the database that we have, which is TMF2034. Now after this, let's say for example now here you make a mistake, like for example we add like roots. What will happen here when you say roots? We have a warning which says access denied to the user roots, because we don't have any users in here like roots. Let's say you change like for example dbaaa, and then again we have another error, which is that this dbaaa doesn't exist in our server, but you can see connection failed, unknown database tmfdbaa. But now when I return it back, you can see here it is connected successfully. And then now we already connected successfully. What I will do, I will just delete this line of echo connected successfully, because what will happen now, if we don't get any error, it means we already connected successfully. So if we have any error, let's say localhost, now if we have any error, automatically it will pop up to us that you have an error. So we just continue, and then we don't have any error currently. The other way to connect to the database, this one is object oriented, the other way is a procedural way. The difference is, like you can see here, we have the same line, it is like everything is the same, but here instead of new MySQLi, you are going to use the MySQLi connect. This is the procedural way. This is the object oriented way, but both of them are going to work. And then here you just even you can put your EB again, and then it will do the same task. But I will do the object oriented way. We are going to use the object oriented, you can just oriented way, and then the procedural we just like the same thing, but the syntax are different. Now we have already connected to our database. Now let's do one thing that we want to display. Now this is the students that we have. We want to display all our students, these students, in a table format in our HTML after the students. For example, now I go back to this lab, display students. We want to show them in a table format in our in this location TMF2034. Now I will just go to HTML, and then I just want to take the HTML table, just want to copy paste some of the code. No need is HTML tables. Let's just grab this table. I'm just gonna use it. Let's just put a table in HTML, and then you need to close your table. Every table has a row. Now the example of the rows is like you can see here, you have a row, 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, and our table has columns, 1 column, 2nd column, and 2 third column. How can we write it? So for every row you have to add a row. You can see here we have a row, we have 3 rows, so for every row you have to add a tr. After that we have a td, it stands for table data. But one thing, it is like the first thing, you can use the table head, which is for th. This is HTML syntax. In HTML, let's say we have table head, and what is our table head? We have a student ID. We can just put here student ID, and then the second th we can use th. I will just copy and paste everything here. Let's say this is our first row, which is all the table heading. A student ID, student name, then we have student email, then the last one we have an intake year. Now when you go back to our browser, when we refresh the lab 7, you can see here we have ID, we have a student name, we have a student email, intake year. But this one, as you can see here, they do not have any like a design, any border. We can just add the simple CSS to it. I just copy paste this section. This is CSS. We can just place it in the head of the page. You can I will just like clean up some of the code. Let's just make it 1 line, so it will be like more easier to read. Now when we refresh, you can see here our table has some borders. And then let's go ahead. Now that's it. We just like, okay, what is the look? Okay, now I'll just close everything. You can see here we have our table head. Now we want to add table rows. We have Ahmad, we have Mari, we have Gary. How can we do that one? The same thing here. Instead of th, what we need to do, we need to use the td. For every td, how many columns we have? We have 4 columns. The student number 1, and then what is the first name is Ahmad, and then we have Ahmed at gmail.com, and then what else do we have? We have a 2022. But now you can see here, when we go back here, we refresh, you can see the student Ahmad and 2022. But this is not a good way. This is a manual way. Why it is manual? You have to insert all the user one by one. You can go check, okay, Ahmad, second one is Mary, then Gary. Let's say you have thousands of records, then you cannot do it manually. Then what we need to do here, we write the PHP code that it will retrieve all the students' IDs, name, email, intake here, and then we just dynamically display it here, and we can see it in the table format. So in order to do that, first thing we need to write some PHP code. We can go ahead and then we write it in the same file config.php that displays the records, display our data. For that one, you can go ahead to the same section here. We can just say select data. In this select data, we have, as you can see here, SQL select, and then the result, and then the query. We will be fetching the data, but I will be going to use the object-oriented way. All right. Now, for example, for us, when we want to display the records, display from students, we say select all from students. If you want to do that in the PHP, what we can do, I will create for example, a query. I will just write the query, and then the same thing, you can say select all from students. This is the same query, but I am just saving it inside a variable. The name is SQL. Then this will not work alone, so you have to, what you need to do, you have to do the query connection. When you do this one, what will happen? Now let's say we have a connection and then the query. When you write this automatically, what will happen? Automatically PHP will execute your query, because this is a function. This query is a function that will accept a query. And then what is the query? Because the query is select all from a student, this is our query. It will automatically execute this query, and then it will store it in this result. And then we have the result. This is our result, which is this all 6 records here, but they stored inside a variable name is result. Then after that, what we can do, we can just display them inside we can display them in the PHP. But now let's not get, I'll just clean up some of the code. You can see here, first thing first, I will just comment everything. We're just writing a while loop to display the records, because this result is a array of it's all arrays, because we have 6 records, and every array, every index it has some records. For example, Ahmad, Mary, Gary, Hazir, Joey, and Anita. But now Joe and Anita. And then now what we do here, we are writing an if condition. What is this if condition? If condition is like we having a result. What is our result? Our result was the result of the query that we execute, and the query was select all from students. And then we are checking the number of rows. What is number of rows? Is greater than 0. We are going to say if number of rows is greater than 0, it means if we have any records available, then execute the query. What we can do here, you can just write a print r. I'm just gonna say a print r, and then here we are going to say a result. You can see here, I'm just going to print out this result to see what do we have in our result. When I refresh it, you can see here our result is like we have a 4 length, we have 4 columns, and the number of rows is 6. As you can see here, we have a num rows which is greater than 0. What is our num rows? Is greater than 0. We have already 6 rows, and the length is 4, which is 1, 2, 3, and 4 columns. So we already have rows, 6 rows. So it means this if condition will be executed. I will just delete this one. I just wanted to show you that we have more than 0 rows. We have rows. After that, what we are going to do, since we are having 6 different rows, what we need to do, I will just comment this section. I'm just explaining the one by one. Now we have a output data in each row. Here we are showing the rows, we are showing the result using a while loop, because we have 6 rows, so we need to loop through it one by one. Then here we are creating a variable which is name is row, and then our row is equals to the result. What was our result? It was select all from students, and then the fetch assoc, which is automatically fetch everything from our array, from our result. And then now in here, when I say print r, let's say okay, print r, and then I'm just gonna print r our row, then what will happen when we refresh? You can see here it will print out everything. We have a student ID, which is number 1, a student name is Ahmed, a student email is Ahmed Gmail, the intake here. This is our first index. Then the second index, you can see we have another array, which is the Mari, and then another array we have Gary, and it continues until number 6. But now we want to display them in a table format. How can we do that one? First things first, you can just echo everything. For example, now I can just, this is just for the test. You can see here student name is what you just, in the previous lab we you can see here how can we print out the string, for example the student name, and also a variable in PHP. How can we do it? First thing we write echo. First thing we write the echo. Echo is used to print out in the system, in the page, and then we say student name, and then we say dot name of the variables, and then we just say row. And then what do we have in the row? Let's say we want to know the student name. You can see here student name, and then when you type student name, because in here our row is student name, you can see student name will be printed out. And then after that we can just write a br, which is a HTML tag. It will add automatically it will add a break line. And then now when I refresh the page, you can see here Ahmad, Mari, Gary, Haziq, Chui, and Anita. So already using the row student name, we can access to the student name, we can access to everything. But now what we want to show them in a table format. We want to show them in the here directly in here in the TD way. So what we can do, we have already 4 columns. We have a first column, second column, third column, and then the fourth. So in the HTML, if you want to display a column, you need to insert it inside a TD. So what I'm gonna do, I will just go ahead, and then since we have 6 different rows, I'm just gonna create an echo. This is the echo. I will just comment this one, it will not be used. We say echo, and then we want to have a tr, which is a table row. We have 6 different rows, and our loop, this while loop, will be we'll just delete it, delete this one as well, and then delete this one as well, so we don't need them. This while loop, what will happen? The while loop will loop 6 times, and then every 6 times will create 6 different table rows. And in every table row, as mentioned here, you can see we have table data. We have 1 row, and then we have 4 columns. So what we need to do, we just create 4 different TD. We have 4 different TDs. You can see 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And then now inside every TD we have you can see here, this is one table TD. We open the tag, and then with the slash we close the tag. Now inside every TD we want to display, we want to tell like, okay, I want to display the student name. So the first one is the student ID, because our table we have a student ID. So what we need to do in our PHP, we need to write something like this to print out the row, and then here it is the column name. What is the column name? Which is student ID, std ID. And then here we have already 1 rows. I will just like enter to just make it like easier to read. You can see here we have another TD, another TD, another TD, and then that's it. We have this one. So we have 1 rows, and then we are here printing out the ID. The second column we have a student name. Okay, we go back to our code. Here instead of the same thing, we just put the double quote and then dot dot. We are going to say a row, and then here we just say student name, then student name. Again here the third column we have a row, and this one going to be our student email, and then the last one is our intake year. You can check here, we have an intake year. Let me just copy paste it. We have intake here. So now what will happen, every time we call this config.php, automatically we are echoing this tr and td. We are having, like, for example, like 6 different rows. Automatically 6 different rows will be outputted, and then every time the columns will be printed out. Now when I go back here, when I see here, you can see they're all more organized, but we want to show them inside here, inside this section. As you can see here in the lab slots, what they did, they created 4 different files. For example, for the retrieving the data, they created 1 file to retrieve the data, they created 1 file to insert the data, and then they will have 1 file for each. But instead of doing that one, we can create function for each one, and then we just display them using the function. Now let's go ahead. We want to show it firstly here. I will, like, for example, what they did in the slides, they included this one. For example, now config.php, instead of here they just included in here. For example, now PHP and then include config.php. They created a 1 file and then they printed out in here. But instead of that one, it is way better to have different functions and call the function. But we are going to do it after this. Now when you see here, automatically everything will be displayed, and then we have our table. But I don't recommend this way. The best way is we just get back to this one. Instead of calling an include function, we are going to call another function. First thing what we do right now here, let me add some comment. We have, okay, let me just like this. Here we have our database connection. Okay, and then here I'm gonna create a function to display the data. Display data, and then what we are going to say, function, a function, and then we are giving a name. We just, let's say we can say display data, or you can just say display records or students records. Any name you can give it. And then what I will do, I will just cut everything and then I will paste it in here. Now we have this function, and then I will just make this like this one, just to save up some space. But yes, it is just echoing. And then now we have this function, display records. Every time you call this function, automatically our records will be displayed. But we need to call this function somewhere. So what we do, we just copy the name, and then I will just paste it here. And this will not work for now. You can see here we have an error because we have connection undefined variable connection. The reason is, right now this is a good way because we are just calling a function to display. We have our database connection, which is automatically connects to everything, connects to our database. Now we have display records, but in here you can see here the connection is not cannot be defined. It cannot understand what is the connection. So what you can do, it means the connection is out of this function and it has not it's not accessible through this. You can create a, for example, now we have a connection, we just can use a global variable. For the global variable, what I will do, I will just write a global and then global, and then I'm just gonna create a connection. Here we have our global connection, and then I will just copy this global connection in here, and then let's see what will happen. Here when I say global connection, automatically this variable connection will be accessible through all our code. Every time you call it, automatically we can access it. Now when I go back to our page, when I refresh, you can see here it is just the same thing, but the difference is we can just call this function anytime. Like for example, if you want to call it somewhere else, you can just call the function and it will print out the result. And then now we can just change the, for example, now the look. For example, now we have a table th. I don't want like a table, like we don't need. Okay, we have this one, or just want to make it a little better, we can just say table all the td. We can have a td, and then they need to have a padding of 5 pixel. Now you can see here we have a 5 pixel padding, and then we just can have a background color. This is optional, you can have it or you just can ignore it. Just gonna use this color, and then when I refresh it, you can see here, alright, the background color, it's okay. Now we just ignore it, say why we have a 0 yellow, then the background. Okay, let's pick another color, is something. You can see here we have this table, and then the padding is like 5 and 8, let's say 9. Okay, now we have our table. Now let me see if I can just remove the border, maybe. Okay, we just, instead of the td, the th, or the table head, we can add some styling to the table head. I'm just gonna copy the same thing, but I want to use different background color. I will just pick, let's say, this color. Now you can see we have this nice table, and then we already added the styling, and then we are displaying the students. The styling has been done via the CSS. And the next, what we want to do, if you remember, every time we want to insert something to our table, we have to do it manually. We have to write insert into, and then like for example students and so on. But we want to do it via the HTML form. How can we do it? First thing first, we are displaying the students here. Then we go back to our HTML. I will just copy this h3. I'm just gonna say here, we say like insert records, or you just say insert, okay, register new student. Now when we go back here, we have register new student. Now as you can see here in our form, we have our database, we have 4 different columns. So we need to create an HTML form that can accept 4 different inputs. It has like a student ID, a student name, email, and intake here. If you go back to the slides also, here we do have the form. You can see here, where is it? It is data only, where the condition. okay, insert, you can see ID, name, email, and intake here. And then like these are the forms, but let's go ahead and then we just say a form, and then we have the input type, we can just say a text, and then what is the name is, let's say, student ID, and then the placeholder, I'm just gonna say ID, and this one required. This is this is all our HTML, and then I'm just gonna copy this one 4 times because we have 4. And then this one, the second one, we have a student ID, a student name. You have to make sure that they all have different name. We have a student name, and then this one we have a student email. They are different. And then this is the intake here. You can say intake, your intake. Let's just put the intake. And then the placeholder, I'm just gonna say intake here. This one will email address. This one is name, or just say student name. And then the last one, what do we have? We have an input type submit. We are going to submit our form, and then the name of it, we can say just say insert, or we just say register. Let's put register, or just say okay, submit. This is the name in the back end, and then the value that the user will see, we say register. Now when you go back to our page, you can see here we have an ID, student name, email address, intake here, and register. This is the form. And then every time when the user click and insert the record, for example, now they want to insert number 7, they put the name, and then they put the email address, they put the intake. When they click register, automatically we need to see it in here, and then we need to insert it automatically to our table. Then now we have, you can see here this placeholder. These are the gray one in the behind to tell the user, okay, this is the ID. You can see here, for example, now I will just change this to student ID, and then you can see student ID. Now we have, as you can see, all of them, they have different names, which is very important. Now your form has a name. I'm just gonna give it a register name, or register form, and then the method is post method. In the PHP, you have to make sure, let's say you have 4 or 5 different forms in your one page, so you have to give it to each one different names, because you want to make sure they have names to separate them, and then to know which forms that you are going to use. And the method post is used, for example, in PHP when you want to receive the form or records or data from the form. There are 2 different methods. One is the post method, which is the most popular, and another one, it has a get method, but then they have differences. The post method is invisible to everyone, and then it has also some the get method is visible to everyone. Everyone can see what you are sending, and it is sending via the URL. It has some limitation, but the post method is invisible to everyone. No one knows what you are sending, and there is no limitation. For example, now you can go ahead about the post method and get method. If I'm not mistaken, in here is the form handling, and then we have here, where is it? You can see the get method versus the post method. You can read about it. You can see when to use it. Is visible to everyone, and then the post method is not visible, is invisible, and it has no limitations. And then we are going to use also the post method for our form. You can see here we can go to the insert data. The same thing we are going to use, like here we have a form, the procedural, and then the PDO insertion. This is the queries. But now what we have here, we need to when the user click it, let's say now I go back to my form, I will refresh it. I will just say number 7, and then the student name, let's say Jobber, and then the email is jobber@gmail.com, and then the integer is 2018. When you click register, right now nothing is happening, so we need to access this somewhere in our code. In order to access it, we can access that inside the PHP via because we are using a post method. A post method, what we can do here, we just can write a if condition to check if we are using a post method or not. We can say a server request. Let me just go ahead and then just copy the form. Okay, form handling, and then we do have the validation, the PHP. Alright, we have validation. Not in here, we just say PHP self required. Alright, here the server request post method, and then now we have a post method. We are checking if we are using the post method, or this one is like, okay, we are going in the next video, we are going to work with the, right now we insert, then in the next video we are going to update and delete. So we have to differentiate between the forms also. This is a registration form, this is a delete form, this is the update form. But now the first thing we are going to check if it's a post method. If the request method is post method or get method, we are using the post method. Here I'm just gonna use a print r just to show you what do we have here. I'm just gonna print r a post, because post method is an array of information, is an array of records. Why it is an array? Because as you can see here, the PHP form automatically save the user data, the data from the form store it inside an array, and then that array is a post method, it's a post in the post array. And then when we just print out the post, what will happen automatically, we can see what do we have. I will just refresh it. You can see here we have a student ID 7, the name is Jobber, the email is this one, and then the year is 2018. So it means we already have the post, we already have the records, everything. But now since we have this one, what do we need to do here? We can just create another function in here. For example, now I'm just gonna create another function. I'm just going to say register new, okay, we just say insert record just for the practice. And then in here we have our records, the function insert record, and then in this function, the insert record, we want to access everything in the post. As you can see here, every of them, a student ID, a student name, a student email, an integer, and submit. Each of them, they have name, specific name. We can do one thing, we can just write, for example, now I'm just gonna say echo just to show you, like, okay, the post, just post the student name. Now the student name, what is the student name? And then what will happen, let me add a breakline to differentiate. Now when we just refresh, you can see the Jobber. So using the post student name, exactly the index, we can easily pass this name to our function. And you already know that function can accept variables, you can see can accept parameters. First thing, we just say intake, we just say the ID, student ID, and then we just say student name, we just say name, and then the email, and then the intake. What happened, I create the function that accept 4 parameters. This, every time you call this function, you need to pass these 4 to this function. Then what we do, we go to the insert record. I will just gonna call this function insert record, and then now I need to pass the 4 variables, 4 parameters to this function. Then what we can do, there are different ways. One thing is like you can just directly copy paste like this one 4 times, and then every time here is we have student ID, and then you just change the name, like for example this is name, this is email, and this is the last one is intake. You can do like this, or there is another way. We can just create variables. For example, we just say a name, and then we just store the student name in this variable, and then we just create another one. We just say email, and then we just say what was the, let me just say student email, and then the other one was the intake. Here you can make sure it is the intake, and then I'm just gonna say intake, and then the first one is our ID, and then we just make sure it is posts method, and then the same thing is student ID. You have to make sure these names, I'm just gonna delete them, don't need it. And then now we have 4 different variables that each variable stores, for example the ID, stores the student ID. Every time when the user click the register, what is this student ID? You can see here std ID. This is not your this is not this one, this is the name of the form that we have here. Let me just change the name so we can just differentiate it. You can see here year, email, name, so you will not get confused, because this student ID, student name, email, and intake here, these are the names from the form, and then here we are accessing them via the post method. Now our student ID, the name is student ID. Here you need to put the student ID. Here we have a student name, you need to put the student name, and then here we have a student email. You can go ahead, student email, then intake here, the intake here. Now every time you want to, like for example now I will just say echo the intake, automatically when I refresh you can see here we have undefined the student ID, the post method. Okay, I need to, now I will just write number 7, the name is, let's say Jobber, or for example like let's Jobber at gmail.com, and then the year is 2018. Now when you click register we have 2018, but now we have an error. No worry about it, you can see too few arguments because you need to add the 4 arguments to this function, but we have not, but it is okay. I just can comment it. You can see here when I comment it, automatically it will go back to the original, and then the intake here is 2018. Now let's go back to our function. The first one we are accepting, it is student ID, so we just can easily pass the student ID here. Let me uncomment this one. First thing is a student ID, then we have a name. You can see here this is the name, this is the email. The third one we just, like you can see here we have email, and then the last one we have intake. Now every time you call this function we already pass our the form inputs to this function, and then we can now access to the 4 inputs via our function. Now again I'm gonna use the global connection. You can see here global connection because we want to access to our database. Let's say here we want to say a name equals to, let's say, now we say a name. Now when I refresh the page you can see here name is Jobber. It means we can easily right now access the name via the name variable. Now here we want to insert to our table. We just create another SQL query. And then what was the syntax in the previous classes? I guess the lab 7 video 3, I guess we say insert into, and the table name is students, and then the values, what are the values that we are going to use, and then we just say values. The first column that we want to insert, it is student ID. I'm just gonna copy paste it. Then the student name, just gonna copy paste it. Then the student email, the same thing. And then the last one is intake here, the intake here. And then after that we need to have the values. So where do we get the values? From here. A student ID, what is the student ID? We just say it is an integer. We just put our student std ID here, which is this one. Then the next one, let me double check, I forgot this. Yes, we just, alright, that's fine. We have our ID, it is integer. The next one is name, which is a varchar. You can go ahead, you can see here, describe students, and then you see here, this is the student name is a varchar. So what we need to do, we just use the varchar, then we use it inside the quote, single quote, and then I'm just gonna use a name. And then the next one is email. I'm just gonna use a single quote, email. And then the last one is intake, which is the integer 11. Integer 11, we just write it intake. Why we are using the single quote here, not double quote? As you can see here, our SQL, we just use the double quote. So you can use the single quote. If you use the double quote, then the PHP thinks that okay, you are already closing your variable, but not, we are not. Now when we echo this query, what will happen when we echo our SQL, this SQL, when we echo this one, now when I refresh again, you can see here, insert into a student ID, the values and everything. And then now when you execute this one in the copy paste this in here, automatically it will be executed, but we do not want to do that one there. What we do, we can just, again, we just write the query, or we just, let's say the values if, and then I'm just gonna copy this. Then what will happen here? If you remember in the previous one, we used the connection query SQL. This connection query, it will execute our query to our database, and we need to have a connection, which is the global connection. And then we are going to say true. Every time when our code is executed, for example, this query executed successfully, we say a new record created successfully. And then if we have an error, we just say okay, the error. And what is the error? We output our query, and then we just say the connect error, which is another function in PHP that it will show you the error that we have. I'm just gonna delete this because we have only one line. It is also will work. And then you can see here we have a new record successfully created. Now let's go and then try our code. It should work. I'm just gonna go back here. I will refresh. Right now you can see here everything is clean and then nothing new. Here I'm just gonna select all from students. We have number 6, and then now let's go ahead and add number 7. We can add number 7, and then the name, let's say we have the same thing. We just add 2018 jobber, and then when we say register, you see here new record created successfully. And then you can see here the student 7 jobber, it is added to our table, which is the dynamic. And then now when we go back here, when we say select all from students, jobber added automatically to our database. This is a dynamic way. We do not have to do anything else, but one thing you have to make sure, which is the student ID is a primary key, and every student ID is unique. You cannot put the 1 because you will get an error in your syntax. For example, now I put 1, then jobber, and then 2018 register. you can see here you have an error because you can see here duplicate entry 1 for the key primary. Your primary key should be unique and you should not have a duplicate. So what we can do, we can say number 8, and then the name we can say, for example, Julia, and then julia@gmail.com, and then the intake year 2021. When we say register, new record created successfully, and then Julia 2021, and then when we say select all from students, everything will be displayed in here. This is a dynamic way that we added. We, like previously, we used to have like write them manually and we copy in the MySQL, but right now everything will be displayed in our browser. We can add, and then in the next video we are going to delete and update. For example, you want to update this record, you can just do it via the form. If you want to delete one of them, you can just do it the same thing via the form. And then let's go back to our here in this block. You can see here this one is like they have a different approach, but you just feel free to go ahead which one that you want to pick, but the objective is the same. We need to display the records. The objective is to connect to the MySQL via PHP. We need to retrieve and display the data to our HTML that we already did here, and then we need to input the data via the HTML form. What we did here, we do the HTML form and then we input directly to our database. Now what will happen, this is all about like everything look fine, but what I did, I used a different approach, and this one is easier. We are using a functions, like instead like we display data, and then here this function should be insert records. Let's say insert record, and then this one display data, this one insert record. This is the database connection. We have 3 different functions that we can call it inside our we have 2 different functions and 1 database connection. This is a database connection. Automatically when you include this config.php, automatically will establish the connection to your database, and every time you call this function insert record, it will insert record to your student table, and this one will be displaying the records for the students. But one thing, like if you want to do it for the lecturer, then you need to edit it slightly, because here the table lecturer, when we say describe lecturer, you can see here they have only 2 columns. Then here you need to change the query. Here you need to have like, you need to update your code, but we are focusing on the student right now, but the concept is completely same. I will just copy and I will upload the codes in the config.php and index.php, either in the GitHub or any other platform. I will just upload it. Just look for the link for the description, and then the code link, it will be uploaded in the video description. Alright everyone, that's all for this video. I will see you in the next video, and thanks for watching.